Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Unexpected Points. I'm going to talk with numberFire and FanDuel's Jim Sannes about quarterbacks, quarterback modeling, and hopefully by the end convince him that Matt Corral is indeed the quarterback one of the 2022 class. Let's get to it. Unexpected Points. Alrighty here, Jim. Thank you for joining me. I have been a guest on your esteemed Covering the Spread, right? Podcast a couple of different times. You and Ed Fang, another friend of mine. So I appreciate you coming on here, despite the fact that I'm just going to haggle you until you give in.
I mean, being haggled by Kevin Cole is a good way to spend my Wednesday. So I was oddly into it. So I'm game. This sounds fun.
All right, let's do it. Now, the funny thing about this, and I'm sure you'll talk about this more. You have your model, so maybe I'll let you get some high level stuff in. But let's just preface everything here. When love is abounding from me or hate is abounding for certain prospects, that the reality is, none of these guys are that great, right? So maybe we're splitting hairs a bit. Maybe we're parsing a little bit too far. But at the same time, if you have evidence that you believe in, then you can still be confident in what the right decision is without being very confident in what the right result will be after that decision.
Right. I think that's a very good way of putting it, because NFL teams, for all their flaws, are better at this than I am. And I need to admit that, because draft capital is probably the best indicator you can get of success in the NFL, even at quarterback. I know we like to make fun of the NFL for its decision-making. We like to say, oh, wow, those idiots wanted to draft Ryan Leaf above Peyton Manning. We point to those misses, but over a large sample, they are pretty good at what they do. So that's kind of why I try to go into everything with an open mind. That's why, when you were talking to me about and sending me articles you'd written about the stuff, I wanted to read it, because I could very well be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. I kind of like Jake Fromm for a couple of weeks, a couple years ago. I am stupid and need to gain my knowledge somewhere.
You've not been proven wrong yet. You've not been proven wrong yet.
I think the quarterback sneak in itself proved me wrong. I think at that point I was like, wow, I should let's reevaluate. That might have been why I built out this quarterback model. So thank you, thank you to the Giants.
There are people out there who had Josh Rosen ranked number 1 in 2018 who were still if he only went to the right team, if he just had a chance, if he just had this, someone, probably Gruden's probably still out there caping for Nathan Peterman somewhere out in the
that's right
out in the mist somewhere. So anyway, let's get into this. Before we get into it, actually, let me just plug really quickly. Promo code Unexpected. 25% off any PFF subscription, all of Locked article content, including your boy right here, his article content, which I believe Jim just endorsed heartily on this podcast. I'll get him to do it some more as we get into this further. All that information, mock draft simulator, rankings for everything that we have, the draft guide, which is going to be huge, obviously coming up in the draft season. Okay, so got the little plug out of the way here. Let's talk modeling for quarterbacks, because as you mentioned, draft position is king. No other position on the field is there a limit to. There's a hard limit of even being able to prove you're any good or not. You hear these stories, apocryphal or not, about when Tom Brady came in for Drew Bledsoe. There's some people, of course, who say, I knew Tom Brady was going to be great the whole time. Sure, everybody says, calm down, guys. And then there are others who more reliably, I've heard stories saying it was almost a coin flip, whether or not they're going to throw Tom Brady in as the backup or someone else. When Tony Romo eventually has a shot coming out as an undrafted free agent, when Dak Prescott gets to play then for Tony Romo with that injury in the preseason. If that never happens, who knows who Dak Prescott is, because of the fact that they're drafted so much later. So it really matters in quarterback, because you're not playing guys in and out and giving them a chance to prove themselves. That draft capital is going to be king. So how do we think about it pre-NFL draft when we don't know the most important metric?
Yeah, so I have two separate models, one of which is factors in draft capital, one of which does not. And I focus on just the pre-draft one right now because we don't know. And like, we're wrong a lot about draft capital even going in because we mess up. Patrick Mahomes, like 29th or so, 29th, 30th on consensus big boards, goes 10th overall. So we don't know. So that's why I focus primarily on the pre-draft model. What goes into that is total QBR, adjusted yards per attempt to get a little bit more of a passing element in there as well. Age and experience. Experience for me is games with 10 plus pass attempts, potentially driven in part by like my broken Northwestern fan brain, where it's like, oh, Trevor Siemian didn't start a lot of games, but he came in relief of Kane Coulter a lot, blah, blah, blah. Like it's not, I don't know, whatever. That's why that was there as opposed to
low threshold. But but again, at quarterback, it's not like there's no one who's not a starter but regularly getting 10 pass attempts anyway.
And the intent there is if you get 10 pass attempts, that is an endorsement of you being on the field. If you're like Dak Prescott freshman year at Mississippi State, where he's coming in to run the ball every now and then, I don't care. Like that's not an endorsement of talent. But if you get 10 plus pass attempts, that says, okay, whether it was garbage time or you started, it's an endorsement of the team wanted to see what you can do. So that's why I go with 10 plus pass attempts there. What it does, the model is it takes in that data, takes in those data points and weights them appropriately based on, what past data has shown for me, what matters, and then spits out a number. It tells me the percentile rank. Now, I disagree with a lot of it. Like, it has Kenny Pickett as a quarterback one in this class among the guys who are projected to go like first-ish round. And I'm like, I don't know about that. So I agree that disagree that plenty, but it does give me like a baseline number to look at and factoring in for the things that I care about most in quarterback prospecting.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, before we get into some of this, maybe I discussed this a little bit on the last podcast when I was previewing the fact that you were going to come on, that for me to have a helpful, meaningful discussion, intuitively, some people might think, well, what you can do is you can get like a film dude and then you could bring a numbers guy in and then the two of them can kind of like hash it out. But the reality is it's like bringing two people in that speak different languages and can't really understand each other. And I, in a biased fashion, would say that the ability to critique a model or add context in a concrete, agreed upon fashion can much more easily be done with a numbers-based analysis than it can with a film-based analysis. The film-based guy, even you see them, they're just all over the place with these takes on who's the best quarterback or not. One person might think that someone has great processing versus another person doesn't have great processing. There's no real way to dig into that. With your model, which I love and that's why I invited you on here, there is a way to dig into it. There is a way to add context. These are small sample things. It can point you in the right direction. But again, for just something like you mentioned, experience being how many games someone's played. For certain quarterbacks, let's say Kyler Murray in the past, he didn't play a lot of games, but then again, he was sitting behind Baker Mayfield for most of his career, who had one of the best college careers of any quarterback in history. So him not playing, while from a pure number standpoint is an indictment against how good he is, it might not be as much of an indictment as it is for players who are sitting behind low-level quarterbacks who never even make it onto a practice squad in the NFL, let alone end up being the first pick. So it's things like that we can go through to add richness to the signal that the overall model is giving us, which may not be perfect on an individualized quarterback basis.
And I think that's true for all these stats because like for everything, every number I just listed is flawed in some way. Like let's say, I don't know when I have Matt Corral's birthday somewhere in here, but like, let's say hypothetically he was born in September. So he's like on the front end of like that his class. He will inherently look worse in my model through no fault of his own by being older. So like that's a flaw there. Total QBR, dependent on context. It's dependent on surrounding talent. There are so many issues with that as well. Draft capital, the NFL messes up. There's, I sung their praises earlier on, but they do make mistakes for sure. They overlook there are inherent biases against certain kinds of quarterbacks that will push guys down unnecessarily, things like that. The games played thing, like you said, issues with that too. So I think that there are always going to be some issues here for sure. It's just kind of like taking everything in a blender and seeing what it spits out. Like Kyler Murray, for example, I think is a great one to flag because yes, that's a great retort. He was behind the freaking Heisman winner, the first overall pick. That shouldn't be marked as a negative, but because the rest of his stuff was still good, he is still the 13th best quarterback in my model since 2010 out of 219 guys invited to the combine. He ranks 13th pre-draft model. In the post-draft model, Kyler moves up to 6th overall. So those factors are marked against him, but because everything else is so good and there's enough stuff in there, he does still get pushed up because there are so many other things in there that can help elevate guys and hopefully make up. If there are multiple things that are negatives, like if he's older and he wasn't like super experienced and he wasn't efficient, that's where we start to get in some pretty deep doo-doo there.
Yeah, exactly. There's not like a disqualifying factor. And again, as you mentioned, if you're extremely efficient, like he was, like Joe Burrow is probably
Correct.
another guy who fits into that category in his final season. That's what really matters. Okay, so what I think is I sent you a list of kind of probing questions that I was going to ask, but I think the best way to do it would be is let's go through these guys, and as we're going through them, we'll discuss some of these contextual things that we can add into it, and maybe adjustments, even mental adjustments that we can make, knowing in our heads that there's not a vast differences separating these guys straight up from the very beginning. So go ahead.
Yeah, so talking about this year's class, you mean?
Yeah, let's talk about this year's class.
Yeah, so with Pickett, I think he's the one to start with because he does lead the pre-draft model. Again, among the guys expected to have relevant draft capital. Because, like, I mean, you could talk about Bailey Zappi, I guess, who is technically first. I don't.
Yeah, we can hold him out. Since
Sure.
I think we're confident that he's not going to have that draft capital behind him. But
so yeah, you talk about film guys. I watched Bailey Zappi and was like, oh, I get it. I get why he's not getting a lot of buzz. So I was like, yeah, this makes sense. So yeah, there is value in that too. With Pickett, so he's very old. And that's why, despite the fact he is the best quarterback in my model, he's not going to be, he's like kind of like a fringe first round pick still in my model because he's 23.9 years old at the day of the draft. That is quite old, and that does matter quite a bit. His QBR was fine, 81.2. I believe that was 10th in the nation this past year. But it's like, again, that's around average for first round pick. He's very experienced, but that kind of gets washed out a bit by his age. Like you should have 51 games with 10 plus pass attempts if you're almost 24 at that point. So even with the top guy in my model, I have a hard time buying it. And that does not look at hand size. It does not look at other factors in there. It does not look at the fact too much that Pickett was not efficient before his final year. Like it doesn't account for that. Once I account for that context, I manually knock him down. So despite the fact he's first in the model, I don't even know if he'd be worth like a top end select. I don't think he'd be worth a top end selection in this year's draft. As someone who, I go like the PFF mock draft simulator way where every quarterback taking the first round is an A+. I go that way too. Maybe not with Pickett.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm also not a big fan of Pickett's. I mean, you mentioned the contextual stuff about how long he's been around. I mean, he played 5 seasons. He had, they have like a mulligan basically on 2020 as far as your eligibility. So they were able to come back again for another season. So he had 5 years where you normally would only have 4 years in the past for any quarterback. So he exhausted his eligibility and then some. Yeah, and it's like you don't want to lean too hard into the hand size thing, maybe some of the arm strength thing. I mean, what I will say for him, which he probably doesn't get enough credit for in this class, and but this class is good across the board in this regard, is he can move okay, he can scramble okay, and that's become a bigger and bigger part of quarterback evaluation. So I think some people might put him in this bucket as if he is the passer, more of the statuesque type of guy versus the Malik Willis or the Sam Howell or something like that. But he can move okay, so that helps me a little bit with his evaluation.
And like he throws well on the move too. Like he actually is pretty accurate on the move and stuff like that. So like if I were to be super mean and super rude, which I wouldn't want to do, like he reminds me of Taylor Heineke in a way where it's he tries really hard. He can move a little bit. He can put it in the right spot, but is the upside there? I don't think Heineke is his best comp. I think he's more like Andy Dalton, where they were both older guys coming out, experienced, decently efficient, but like you have a cap on the ceiling because of some of the outside factors there. So I agree with you. I agree with your assessment that like he can move decently well and he does a good job of throwing on the run. A lot of times he has to throw on the run because he holds on the ball too freaking long, kind of puts himself in bad position. So it's partially self-inflicted. But like, yeah, I'd agree that is a positive of his game.
Yeah, it's funny with Heineke. I remember Bengals fans were not too happy with me this season whenever I'd say anything bad about Joe Burrow. But I called Joe Burrow like a rich man's Taylor Heineke, and people were upset about that. But hey, if Taylor Heineke was 6'4" and had a little bit better arm, he'd be pretty good. He'd be a good quarterback. The problem is he's just like he's tiny and he doesn't have a good arm. So that kind of falls into the play with Pickett also. All right, so once we get past Pickett, where like again, we have probably the contextual stuff around him is almost all negative, I would say. Like the fact that he had the extra time there, and the fact that he wasn't as good before as he was in his last season, so we're not dinging him for that, and the hand size, all that sort of stuff there. Who do we have next? I guess are we gonna go with the big five, or are we gonna bring Carson Strong into the mix too?
I'm okay not bringing him in.
Okay, yeah, I'm okay too not bringing him
he's
in.
fine.
No offense to talk about statues. No offense to pocket statues, like pocket sloth, as Evan Silva would say. But
he's like kind of fun because it's like, oh, he actually has some like juice in his arm, but then he runs like Ben Roethlisberger, or like 2022 Ben Roethlisberger, and I'm like, oh no,
not
and like
great.
You feel bad because it's like the knee injuries, like it's not inside his control, so it's like I feel bad, but also like move like Big Ben, probably not a ringing endorsement. So the number 2 guy in my model is Sam Howell. I know there are a lot of issues with Sam Howell, and I agree with them. The sack thing, oh my goodness, get rid of the freaking ball. What are you doing? And like his offensive line is not good, but that's not an excuse for a 24% sack rate on 3rd and long this past year. It's not an excuse for a 12% sack rate overall. That said, he has some intriguing elements to him that I like a lot. And I think that this discussion actually ties in with Corral, ties in with Pickett, ties in with Malik Willis too. Age matters a lot for me. So part of the reason why Sam Howell grades out well is because I have just raw age. Again, raw age is in my model. And the reason for that is, let's look at the quarterbacks since 2010. I know that for your stuff, you were looking since 2016 and sorting them based on successful, non-successful picks. But I just have quarterbacks taken in the first round since 2010 who have been inside the top 10 in numberFire's total net expected points in 1/3 of their qualified seasons. So looking at the ages of those guys who check that box, and it's like Mahomes, Herbert, Allen, et cetera, et cetera. Ages for those guys, 21.6, 22.1, 21.3, 22.6, 23.3, that's Joe Burrow, 21.6, 21.9, 21.9, 22.2, 21.7, and 21.5. There was only one guy older in there than 22.9 years old at the time of the draft. That was Joe Burrow. Pickett is 23.9. Willis is 22.9. Corral 23.1, I believe, there. And then Desmond Ridder is 22.7. So he's closer. And I don't ding him as much because he's very experienced. He's had the 4 years versus 5 for Pickett. And the age is there as well. Howell's the only guy who fits like the prototypical mold of being young and experienced coming out. And if you just look at like young and experienced guys who go in the first round, that's kind of an assumption for Howell because I'm not totally convinced he goes in the first round. I'm not totally convinced he should either because of the issues. But if he does, that young experienced bucket is where you find Herbert. It's where you find Mahomes. It's where you find Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson. You find all those guys in that bucket. That's why I'm willing to not dismiss Howell. I'm not banging the table for him because I think the sacks are a legitimate concern. And that's why I thought that the piece that you mentioned with sack avoidance and scrambling was so important because like it validates my hesitancy towards liking a guy who I do like for a couple reasons. I just can't bang the table for him because to me, those are legitimate and worthwhile red flags.
Yeah. So Howell is the guy who probably looked like the best prospect a year prior because he was the guy who was going to be like your prototype 3-year starter, come out, not exhaust all of his eligibility, not be redshirted, not have any of that stuff started happening. Even some of the younger quarterbacks who didn't get over that threshold, and we talked about this a little bit before, but even guys like Herbert and Luck, they didn't have to come back for their senior
Yeah.
years. They probably would have been drafted just as high as they. Well, I mean, Luck would have been the number one pick if he decided to come out after 3 years rather than 4 years. I believe Herbert would have been still a top 10 pick.
Yeah, because
Because
that
he
was
didn't
the
really play
Kyler
that
year, I
well.
believe, correct? So it was Kyler and then
Yeah.
like Dwayne Haskins. So he probably would have been a top 5 pick in that class.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
he would have been even a better pick because if anything, he put more film on tape for people to talk themselves out
Sure.
of Justin Herbert potentially on there. So those guys don't even really count in that regard. So you're right. That is very much the prototype sort of thing. Now, Howell is getting no hype. So I do wonder if perhaps there's like a sneaky sort of thing to him where people are forgetting about those positive contextual elements that go against what they're saying. Now, you mentioned the sacks, and again, sacks are something I think gets ignored a little bit too much. I don't know what it says about your ability to process information, but I feel like great quarterbacks, and probably Peyton Manning is like the greatest in this way of being able to compute, like have this instinctual understanding of like EPA, basically, like expected points added, and what he's doing. So I feel like for quarterbacks, and why sacks are important to me is that we may not necessarily think of them as harsh. You're like, oh, his offensive line stinks, this and that, but like throwing an incompletion rather than taking a sack, recognizing what's coming in who you have to go to as a check down, things like that. It really is a huge deal for expected points added. And you see guys like Peyton Manning or Dan Marino or others, despite the fact that they can't move at all, were able to really limit their sacks and do that. So for him, I have this other calculation where I look at these survival curves for offensive line. So it shows like how much time, how likely it is you'd survive not being pressured after a certain number of time. And then you can place the credit or the blame, if you want to say, for a sack on the quarterback versus the offensive line. Yeah, he and Willis are like off the chart, especially when you talk about first round
not in the good way
picks. Yeah. Like first round picks. And again, the data we have only goes back to 2014 for this sort of stuff, but first round picks, Fields is kind of bad, but not nearly as bad as they are. But all the other first round picks were actually pretty decent as far as being able to avoid sacks. So yeah, I don't know if it's a disqualifying red flag, but it's certainly a red flag for him.
Yeah, and I think that's why, again, I'm not like leaping towards him by any means. And like you watch his games and you see why that happened. He does hold on the ball too long, whether it's lack of confidence in his pass catch. I think if you want to be generous, that's the assumption. I don't really want to be generous though, because that's how you lead to a lot of bad decisions. And I don't really want to go down that path. And like you could talk about the pass catchers, talk about losing Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, guys like that. But also his sack rate wasn't as high as a freshman and a sophomore, but it was still higher than he'd want it to be. It was in the Fields zone, where like we're talking about it being a red flag for Fields. He was in that area his first 2 years and then just jumped off the charts this past year. And the reason that I like to put weight on sacks, which is why QBR is weighted into my stuff, because I care about it. I played offensive line in high school, so when I read Dr. Heger's piece about like quarterbacks under the sack, I was like, yes, it's not me, it's you. When it's a sack, it's on the quarterback, not the offensive lineman. So like I agree that like it should matter a lot, and that's why I'm hesitant with Howell, and it also is a pretty big reason why I'm hesitant with Willis as well.
Yeah. I mean, he's another guy who can move. Mm-hmm. If I were to like rank order guys, I feel like can credibly run in the NFL. I think he's behind. I mean, Willis is above everyone, of course, but I feel like he's second. And even though some of his stats may not be that different from Matt Corral, I feel like he can probably hold up a little bit better. As far as how he's running there, it's not a surprise that Corral had some injury issues, so he has that upside there. I mean, maybe he's like Russell Wilson-ish, like he's always going to take sacks, but if he can move and avoid and do that, the problem is you have to be so good. Like Russell Wilson is one of the best, just pure throwers of the football from point A to point B when he moves around. So that leaves a kind of a high bar for success for him. But if he ends up going in the second round or something like that, I mean, I think it's a great pick in the second round for someone who can scoop him up at that point.
Honestly, even like I've seen some mocks of the Lions taking him at 32. That's fine. You know, you get the 5th-year option. You're mitigating risk by taking him there. And honestly, like the risk I think is overblown with like first round picks in general, but specifically like back end of the first half. Like if he busts, who cares? Like the other player going to pick could bust too. So like, why not take a swing at a high upside type player? And all quarterbacks at that range are high upside. Like honestly, the Jordan Love pick didn't pan out, but like was it really that stupid? I don't know. Like, they probably should have gotten a receiver for Rodgers, but like, you're taking swings at volatile assets, and volatile in the good way. So I think that like, even the guys I'm not like, if Willis somehow got to 32 and they took him there, awesome, great pick. I think that's a smart thing to do, just because I think we focus too much on the downsides, not enough on the upsides, specifically with quarterbacks at that latter end of the first round.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense to me when I hear, and I hear this often, that quarterbacks, they have like inflation. Like there's this inflation where they get moved up a half a round further than they should. And I always think to myself, where should they go? Like when I hear people talking about this class, and I've heard people give discussions, they'll say, "Oh, I would put a third round grade on him." I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Explain that to me. Like you only take the top of the top in the first round, and if anything, I believe if you're going to point to like everything's about incentives in my mind. So I think GMs are negatively incentivized to take quarterbacks who are uncertain in the middle or back half of the first round, because people make such a big fucking deal about it and about the fact that they're tied to this guy. When Mac Jones is taken at 15, or Justin Fields, he went 10th. Okay. They did trade up he went 11th. They did trade up for him. So I'll give you that. But if he was just the 11th pick, guys bust when they're 11th pick all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. But yet that is somehow would have been tied around Ryan Pace's neck for the rest of his GM-dom, which obviously ended prematurely, but it would have been for that sort of thing, when in reality is like, you can just wipe your hands clean and start over again with them. So I think these guys actually get pushed down too far when it comes to teams that should just be taking shots in the middle or second half of the first round.
I fully agree. And I think that, again, once you factor in the fifth year option, I know that's a talking point that gets brought up a lot, but it should be, because it does matter a lot, especially for like this class where it's a lot of guys who may not be productive right away. You want that extra year of evaluation before you have to commit. And like, I know that they're eligible for extensions after the third year, but like, if you get 2 extra years to evaluate this specific class, that seems pretty. I mean, I'm going to use the word volatile here. I'm not using it in the positive sense, though, because I don't think the upside is necessarily there for most of them. But like, if it's an unpredictable class, I want that extra year. So it's a talked up point, but I think it's justifiably talked up.
I mean, it's big. Think about Dak Prescott, right? So he did no fifth year option for him. It probably cost them, like when you combine the actual cost of the franchise tag with the fact that they exhausted both franchise tags a year earlier than they would have, making the third prohibitive and giving him more leverage in the negotiation. I mean, it cost them tens of millions of dollars.
But think about it from the flip side too, with the Browns with Baker Mayfield. If not for the fifth year option, they would have had to have extended him before this past year, because they're probably not going to go into a final year with him at that point. And they probably, given how well he played in 2020, probably would have extended him. Instead, they got that extra year of evaluation, and I still hold that hope for Baker still being like a competent starting quarterback. I don't think he should be paid 40 mil though. And I think that actually, the fifth year option in a way kind of saved them from making a potential mistake in that regard as well.
Yeah. I mean, one more thing here. Even when you extend guys early with reasonable-ish sort of contracts, like Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, both of those were done after their third season, as early as you can do it. You are building in the fourth year and the fifth year option into that extension. So you're extending it. There's actually like a 6-year deal, a 4-year deal becomes actual 6-year deal. And like, it's not that far after the end of what would have been their fifth year option that you can kind of get out of that deal. You're going to take some dead money, you're going to do whatever, but you can kind of get out. So again, it gives you just a longer runway to make all of these different decisions and a little bit more leverage when you can point out to the fact of like, hey, we can keep you for that fifth year, and then we can go ahead and franchise tag you. We're talking, you're going to be playing on a year-by-year basis for so long in the future. Quarterbacks will come to the table maybe a little bit easier in that circumstance. Okay, let's move on to the next guy. Who's next on here?
Yeah, so next for me is Desmond Ridder, and it's similar to the Howell discussion, where like, I'm not opposed to putting him where my model has him, but I can't bang the table for him because of, again, red flag. It's a very consistent theme throughout this one. But the reason that Ridder grades out so well based on my stuff, and again, well is relative, it's just relative to this class, but very experienced. 49 games of 10 plus pass attempts for him. He's just 22.7 years old, so a full year younger than Kenny Pickett. He is younger than Malik Willis, despite having 26 games more of experience there. He had a better total QBR in his final year than Malik Willis. He had a better adjusted yards per attempt than Malik Willis. He's very fast. As we saw at the combine, doesn't use it as much as a lot of other guys do, but like he has that within his bag of tricks. So I like Ridder a decent amount. I like Howell a bit more because again, I think that the upside in very young, experienced guys is pretty big. But I think Ridder's very interesting. The red flags with him are his sack rates on strict passing downs, very high. It's not as high as Willis and Corral or Willis and Howell, but it's still high enough where it's a bit of a red flag. I don't include like obvious passing situations in my model because it's such a small sample. It's very, very finicky, very volatile. But on 3rd and 6 or longer this year, Ridder's adjusted yards per attempt was 3.6, which would be the lowest of any first round pick since 2010 if he were to go in the first round. So like there are things in there that make me a bit nervous when you watch Ridder, you see like some inconsistent throws. I don't care about that too much. I think that the other stuff kind of offsets that. But like even with a guy who I think it's reasonable to like a decent amount, I still see red flags. But I think like if I'm just ranking myself, I might go Howell Ridder as my top 2 guys because they have the most building blocks for upside, I guess is the way that I phrase that within their statistical profiles.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Ridder and age, I think that it's like we're getting a little bit skewed on the relative, like it's like, well, relative to the oldest quarterback ever, he's okay. You know, like, I mean, maybe God, I was like an infant or something. I did not turn 22 years old until I had graduated from college for like 5 months. Okay. Like, I don't understand how these guys are so old. Like
this class specifically is very old. It's not,
because it's like when I'm not in New York anymore, but New York, they had it being like a calendar year school year. Like he would not fit in the age year, even him. So it's not like he's not as old as these other guys, but he is a full like senior age, you know, he really is a full senior age. So for that, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit too, like the difference of age versus eligibility and things like that. Like he played his well, it's not just eligibility, it's I'm counting red shirts in that also, like how many years you've been in college sort of thing. So he's through the full 4 years. So I don't think he's not the same level as Howell, as someone who was like clearly an actual 3-year guy. And again, when it comes to age, like, I mean, they're kind of freaks, but someone like Sam Darnold, when he left after 3 years in college, he was not even 21 years old by draft time. So he was like more than 2-year almost difference between Ridder, who was 1 year longer. My problem with Ridder right now, and this has nothing to do with your model, so this is just my rant. I just want to get off my chest. This whole like pro system, he's running a pro system. He's doing full field reads. Like I'm getting strong 2017 DeShone Kizer vibes from the same crew that was saying that about him versus Mahomes and Watson, as if it means something. When I looked up the other day, you talk about QBR. So now just explain, QBR is the ESPN metric, which is an EPA per play based type of metric. Like I'm looking up our EPA per play numbers for 2016. And, Mahomes and Watson are like top 10 and, Kaiser's like 30 or something like that. I just feel like I like guys who are successful, and Ridder was not unsuccessful. He was up there. I think he was 10th or something like that in QBR, but he wasn't that great the year before. He's not like as good as some others there. So I don't know. I'm a little bit, I thought I was higher than him on some people, but now that there's this quote unquote buzz happening, but perhaps this will end up being a DeShone Kizer situation where draft Twitter has a lot of buzz and then he goes like way after where people are thinking that he might go. Yeah.
DeShone Kizer, his final year, 69.5 total QBR. That's not good.
It's not good. And he runs too. Right. Like you should be getting extra credit for that. Right. For in QBR, like you get a higher proportion of the EPA benefit for running and scrambling than you do for throwing the ball.
Yeah, exactly. And like Kizer was 48th percentile for my model, whereas Ridder is 76th, somewhere in there. So a bit better, mostly because, more experience, better efficiency numbers. But I think that Kizer went 52nd overall. So I think that they could wind up falling in a similar bucket. My model does like Ridder more, but I think that
Yeah, no, I think he's better. I think he's
yeah,
better than Kaiser. I just think it's funny that, like,
I
for all
hate
that we say these guys,
the pro system thing too. I think that's very stupid. I agree.
I mean, for all that we say about the NFL and these GMs are a bunch of idiots, like, I think if I were going to put, like, maybe it depends on who you follow, right? But if I was going to put, like, draft Twitter, I mean, they hated Justin Herbert. They loved Deshaun Kaiser, man. I saw too many Deshaun Kaiser QB1. Trust me, they were out there. Deshaun Kaiser QB1. They hated Josh Allen. Now, then whatever. The analytics hated Josh Allen too. So that's okay. So we can all take a collective L there. But I just don't know if they've been any better. And clearly they were worse in the case of Deshaun Kaiser, having him as potentially being a guy that belonged with the Mahomeses or the Watsons of the world. Okay, so but Ridder, but I don't hate him as much. I can't let myself, like, be tilted too far into the hate, like, really embrace my hate too much by the fact that other people, I believe, are overvaluing him, which is a major problem of mine. Okay, let's go next, and let's talk about my clear QB1, and we'll spend the next hour here as I work you on this one.
Yeah, that's Matt Corral. So Corral is a 69th percentile for me.
Very nice.
Yes, very nice. And that puts him fourth behind Pickett, Howell, Ridder. Pickett is 80th percent or 79th percentile. Howell is 77th, and Ridder is 74th. So he's not that far behind.
All 10%.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
There's not a huge gap between these guys. And I went into the evaluation process of Corral thinking I'd like him because when I'm not in the terrible state of New York, I like to play college football DFS. And, like, Matt Corral's freaking amazing for college football DFS because he runs. He's in the super
11 rushing touchdowns last year. That
exactly.
Nice.
It's a fun thing, and that made him pretty fun, I thought, for all of last year. But then you look at the numbers, and he's 23.2 years old. And I am willing to budge on that because Joe Burrow, I think, was pretty good in my model if they have something where they stand out. Corral, for the key components of my model, is not higher than the 77th percentile in any metric. He's 77th percentile in final year total QBR. And as you've mentioned, he was better in 2020 than he was in 2021. Even if we account for, like, the fact that it was a COVID year, fewer fans in the stands, that was not as true in SEC stadiums, but also, like, it's relative to his peers. So that's accounted for in this number. 77th percentile in total QBR. That's kind of the one place where he does pop. 31 games with 10 plus pass attempts. And he wasn't sitting behind Baker Mayfield or, guys like that. He was sitting behind Jordan Ta'amu and
that's
sorry, USFL people.
St. Louis Battlehawks legend.
I know.
Jordan Ta'amu.
Shout out XFL.
Okay. So, let's go back to XFL. I'll bring it back. And number 2 overall pick in the USFL draft. I mean, okay, so let's not slough him off like that, but go ahead.
Clayton Thorson also a first round pick in the USFL. So let's not get too crazy here.
But Shea Patterson's the only one who went first. Okay,
after Jordan Ta'amu, he split time with John Reese Plumlee. And, like, we can joke.
He started the season and then he got yanked, basically.
Correct. Again, not for Jordan Ta'amu. Again, XFL legend, Kansas City Chiefs legend, Jordan Ta'amu. It's for John Reese Plumlee. That's a little bit
Jordan Ta'amu is a lot of guys, has a lot of teams, a lot of practice squads. He was there. He spent a week in a lot of different places.
I choose Kansas City Chiefs legend personally because I think that sounds better. That's just the way
I think it's where he was first. So
yeah. So that's where I want to go there. That's concerning. And then, like, this is not my model. This should not matter. But it's really weird that Matt Corral is not eligible for the Senior Bowl, given he has been there for 4 years. He is 23.2 years old, but had not graduated, whereas Sam Howell is 21.6, was only in school for 3 years and had graduated. And, like, that does not matter. It should not matter. People should value education the way they want to. But it's freaking weird, and I can't get it out of my brain. It's like a worm that's stuck.
Okay, now let's talk about this age thing, because I want to talk about this. Yeah, like, I cannot explain how he's so old. I remember a similar thing happened with Justin Fields, where he was like a year older than everyone, even though he came out as a junior. He wasn't this old, right? Because this would be like
he's 22.2
fourth year.
He was 22.2 at the time of draft. So actually, he's the exact same as Corral if you account for the fact that he came out a year earlier.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, like and then I read that he was held back in, like, junior high or something like that. I looked through Matt Corral, I didn't see anything, I don't know, maybe he was, like, eating paint chips or something like that and never quite got into, preschool at the right level or something, but there was nothing being held back, there were no extra years, there were no missing years within high school and college, he was just basically a year older than everyone all the time. So, this is my question here, and I'll preface it by saying Football Outsiders has different models that they do for different positions. They have a model for receiver called the playmaker score, and their model input is not age for that. They use whether or not someone is an early declare.
Mhm.
So my question to you would be, I think age is a good like age is something that says for me it's easier to figure out because there's not all this context of
Right.
redshirting or not or this or that. So it's like, but is age really most useful as a proxy for like how many years they've been in college? And if so, the fact that he should be like the number of years he's had in college would be the equivalent of someone a year younger most of the time. Does that ding him too much potentially?
I think that's worth digging into. And
Yes.
I am open to
I'll take that. I'll
yeah,
take that.
yeah, I think that's worth
1
discussing.
point. I wish I don't have my ding. I dinged my 1 point there. But go ahead.
I'll give it 0.5 points. How about that? 0.5 points because when you were messaging me, I like looked into this. And so I pulled quarterbacks since 2010 who were drafted at age 22.6 or older and were a top 50 pick in their draft.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to read you the names. It's
Sure.
16 dudes. So Joe Burrow, awesome. Baker Mayfield, I like more than I should. So I'll count that as a win. Why not?
I mean, whatever. As far as even number one picks go, he hasn't been like bad. Yeah. Okay.
Colin Kaepernick, longtime starter in the NFL, pretty successful. Brandon Weeden, my goodness, what are we doing here?
Okay, we're not counting anyone who's 26.
A senior
but
citizen,
go ahead.
correct. Andy Dalton, Derek Carr, both successful players. Tim Tebow, EJ Manuel, Ryan Tannehill, older. That's explainable because he was a wide receiver. Carson Wentz, Christian Ponder, Jake Locker. So there have been some good quarterbacks. I think that Burrow, earmuffs, Kevin, don't listen to this part. I think Joe Burrow will be a good quarterback in the NFL. So just disregard that part. Don't kick me off.
This is like the Ridder thing with me. There's a Cincinnati tie-in. Someone actually hit me up with you hate all Cincinnati quarterbacks, but
it's the PFF location.
I don't think Burrow is good. I'm not ready to crown the guy as Tom Brady like some people are on here. Yeah, but what other guy I'll mention here? Well, actually, it doesn't look like I can't tell. So Russell Wilson, he was November 29th of 1988. So that's 2012. So he was not.
So Russell Wilson,
he was old too. See, but he doesn't. He's not. He was drafted too late. But he's another guy who was old.
23.4. He was not a first round pick, which is why I didn't have him in there.
He's not a first round pick. But anyway, I was going to throw him in there because he's another name that comes to mind as old dude.
Right. Yeah. So 23.4. He was older. He was obviously very successful. Kirk Cousins, I think, was also old. 23.7.
Yeah. Fourth round pick.
And he's been a starter. He's earned gobs of money. So like older guys in the non-first round might be more acceptable. But like you listen to that list and there are some solid guys in there, but there aren't really superstars. And like
Russell, that's why I had to get Russell Wilson up in
correct.
there. Okay,
Russell Wilson counts as a superstar. Yes. I think that definitely is valid. And like you can see some overlap. Wilson is thicker. Like he's better built despite being short than Matt Corral. But I can see some overlap there because Corral is pretty athletic, but like there aren't really superstars. Whereas again, the list that I read off before of the true superstar first round picks in the NFL, almost all very young. Again, Joe Burrow, the only one older than 22.6. Luck was 22.6 when he came out, despite going back for that extra year. Herbert, 22.2. Everyone else was 21 years old when they were drafted. So overlap with like Burrow, and with Andrew Luck, I mean, less so with Luck, but they were both like, they had something exceptional talent. Luck had the exceptional draft capital. Well, we can count that. Burrow had the exceptional advanced metrics, 94.9 total QBR in his final year. Baker had the exact same thing. He was exceptional in his final year. And I look at Corral and like, I'm willing to make exceptions if a guy is good enough, but I'm not totally convinced of that because Weeden had a better total QBR his final year. Kaepernick did. He was 87.7. I think we kind of forget that Colin Kaepernick was a decently good quarterback in college too.
Well, yeah, again, a lot of running going on there,
Yeah.
so that helps boost it up. Yeah.
Baker 92.6, Burrow 94.9. So like I'm more willing to make concessions when I have a reason to make concessions. And
What about 2020 Matt Corral,
very good.
89.9 behind only Mac Jones and Justin
Yeah.
Fields?
So this question came up when Jordan Love was coming out, because whenever you would consider, the thought crossed your mind, Big Brother's in there looking at you like, oh, if you're considering saying bad things about Jordan Love, have you considered the fact that he was better his second to last year? And people, it was very annoying. So I looked into it and I was like, okay, should I go with best season, numbers as opposed to total QBR? So at that time, there have been 56 quarterbacks taken the first round since 2000. 19 of those 56 had their best adjusted yards per attempt in a year that was not their final year in college. So 19 guys at 56 had this situation similar to Jordan Love. 6 of those had an adjusted yards per attempt that was at least a full yard better in their earlier year than they're in their final year. So like massively better in a non-final year than they were in their final year. Love was 3 yards different. So big gaps. Those guys, Jordan Love, Jameis Winston, Rex Grossman, Blaine Gabbert, Christian Ponder, Brady Quinn, Josh Allen. So Winston,
Sam Darnold not in there. I know Sam Darnold was a lot better.
I think that his gap, he might have actually been in that year. Yeah.
Okay. No. Yeah. I was wondering about Darnold.
You mean Jameis Darnold?
Darnold. I always made Jameis Winston as like one of my comps for Darnold because
he was my comp.
They were both similar. They were both redshirt sophomores, I guess, who had excellent redshirt freshmen
and
seasons.
a ton of picks as in their final year.
Questionable decision.
Darnold was 9.0 his first year, 8.5 his second year. So that was why he wasn't on that
So he's actually pretty close. I guess he just upped he also upped the touchdowns there. Okay, go ahead.
So like Josh Allen, he's a hit. Awesome. Superstar. Jameis Winston was a successful quarterback for 5 or so years. Could be a successful quarterback in the future. Not a superstar, but like fine. You're okay with that as a first round pick. But outside of that, Grossman, Gabbert, Ponder, Quinn, and Jordan Love. Hard for me to like make that tweak. So I'm open to changing that if I get
Herbert's close, but I don't think he qualifies because his best season was his sophomore season and he only played 8 games.
Yeah.
So he only had 206 pass attempts, but I believe he would have been
at least exactly that number.
At least one, but go ahead.
He was at exactly that number. His 10.0 as a sophomore, 9.0 in his final year. So that was the guys who were more than one off. Herbert was exactly
and the sophomore number is you should be less confident in it also. So yeah.
I had the cutoff be 200 pass attempts, so he would have qualified had he been.
Oh, he would have. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Had he been just 0.1 worse as a senior there at Oregon. So I looked into it. I didn't see enough to convince myself that I should go with best season versus most recent season. I'm not totally tied to that though. I think that's a legitimate discussion worth having is what I would say.
Yeah. I think it's like an interesting added data point. I agree with you though. Final season seems to be much more important. Now, whether it's like overfitting for guys like Russell Wilson who weren't that great and then was awesome in his final season, or Joe Burrow who wasn't very good and then awesome in his final season. And there have been a handful of guys like that, quite honestly. Maybe that could also be the case. Like Deshaun Watson's another guy. Well, he didn't do that much worse. He just threw a ton of picks his final season as opposed to his earlier year. So it's interesting. The age thing I think is interesting versus eligibility and how that all plays out, because I think that age, the idea that you are like physically more mature or something like that, and that's the age question, I think that plays out probably. Like for instance, Matt Corral was a starting quarterback. I think it was the first starting quarterback in this high school's history. But I mean, dude was like a year and a half older than everyone else. Like I could see that as a freshman in high school making a big difference. I think later on, again, I think it's more of a proxy for like early production you want to see, and that's when age comes into play, which can get confusing with these old dudes. But I don't know if we have enough like guys who were held back in 6th grade to build a whole sample on, but he seems to fall into that bucket.
I mean, I'm in the Corral bucket personally because I went to 2 years of preschool because I wanted to watch Batman in the morning. My mom gave me the choice because I was a July birthday, and she's like, "You can go to kindergarten next year, or you can go to another year of preschool and like watch the cartoon Batman in the morning." And I was like, "Come on, make it tougher on me here." So I get it, Matt Corral. You want to watch Batman in the mornings? I get it. I'm with you, but I also can't buy into him quite as being like the QB1 in this class.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is crappy. I was young, so I'm on October birthday, but I still went. So yeah, so Matt Corral. If I was like finishing up as a senior right now, Matt Corral. Let me see. That would be like 23 and a half when I. So he would be more than a year and a half older than I was at
Yeah.
the same exact time. So it is pretty crazy for him. Okay, so that's a couple of points of context. I might have lost a quarter of a point on that one. I'm not sure which direction we're going in here. How about other adjustments? Well, maybe we should talk about maybe we should just go through Willis first
Sure.
before I talk about some of this other stuff. So actually, this will play into Willis. My other questions. Go ahead. Let's talk about Malik.
Yeah, so I think I get why people like him because he has the components you want for upside. And like you watch that Mahomes versus Allen game, you're like, wow, these guys are aliens. Like, why would we not just sell out for those guys? But there are like a lot of like red flags statistically with him. Specifically, again, he's older, 22.9 years old, 23 games played for him. And like he lost out in the quarterback battle at Auburn. That's why he transferred. It's like the transfer obviously does add in time to the equation. And maybe that's why he's older. But like you also ask yourself, why did he transfer? And like that's a tougher question with Malik Willis because like there are systemic issues that could lead to a quarterback like Malik Willis being downplayed. So I want to like acknowledge that and be like, okay, maybe there were factors at play that he couldn't control, which is why he had to transfer. But even at Liberty, not like the best efficiency numbers, a 70 total QBR. His final year as AYA was 8.4. He's shorter, and I think we don't really talk about that because he's thick. That's something to consider as well. So I wanted to look at other quarterbacks my model disliked and be like, okay, how often is it wrong? The answer is pretty often. So, like that's because we're all wrong pretty often. But so I looked at quarterbacks taken the first round who graded out worse than Malik Willis in my model, who is in the 36th percentile for me. So quarterbacks who are worse were Carson Wentz, I don't know, Jordan Love, Christian Ponder, Jake Locker, Blaine Gabbert, Josh Allen, ding, and then Ryan Tannehill. And we hear Josh Allen be the comp a lot for Willis because they both have strong arms and they both can run. But Josh Allen was also a full year younger than Malik Willis coming out. He also didn't have a ton of experience. So like that was also ding against him, but he was younger. So I think that the better comp for Willis is Wentz or Tannehill. I don't really care which. I think that they're both kind of like in that realm. And those are guys who have shown upside in the NFL. They've shown flashes of being good quarterbacks. They haven't done so consistently. Maybe you could count Tannehill because he's done it for a couple years being like decent, but like I'm hesitant there. So I think that there is a justification for taking Malik Willis in like the first round, like at the back end of the first round because of those traits, because when it's my model has missed on guys before, it's missed on guys with some similarities to him. But that's why like when there was buzz about him going second overall, I'm like, are you sure? Because that doesn't seem very wise. Even the Panthers at 6 doesn't seem very wise. I don't think they'll do it because the timelines are not jiving with Matt Rule with how he needs to win now and Willis and stuff like that. But I can get at the back end of the first round because of the traits and because risk shouldn't matter very much there. But anything above that, like the red flags here are really, really big.
Yeah, yeah. I might disagree with you a little bit on Matt Rule. I feel like you know who their quarterback is right now, right?
Fair.
I mean, that's not a win now, win later.
That's actually a very good point. Yes,
win before option. I feel like they almost. I feel
that's
like
a full
Rule's
point
toast.
for Kevin right there. That's a full point for Kevin.
Rule's toast. He's dead. But Fritterer like needs something to happen here, and then he'll survive Rule potentially and move on there. So yeah, I agree. The Willis thing, the conversation. I feel like I'm in like the Twilight Zone a little bit when I hear people talk about him because I'm like, wait. Like, why is this guy like the number one quarterback? It's like, oh, he's like Josh Allen. He's 5 inches shorter than Josh Allen. He has the same weight and height as Baker Mayfield. Okay. Like, are we talking about Baker Mayfield being like some physical specimen? I know he can run a lot better than that, but he is not Josh Allen. Okay. He is not Justin Herbert. He is not even Patrick Mahomes, who's, a full 6'3".
Even Wentz and Tannehill are huge. I think they're the best comps, but they're not necessarily one-to-one comps.
Yeah. It's not the be all end all to be tall, but we're normally concerned about Malik Willis having awesome stats and not paying attention to them because he's not 6'5". But now he's being paid attention to, and his stats aren't there. So I don't really get that. Another thing about him, when we talk about needing to transfer, I mean, he was beat out by, I think, 3 different quarterbacks at Auburn over the course of 2 years. So, that's triple the beat it outedness of some other quarterbacks. Add that to your model.
Yeah.
Not Auburn, yes. And then Liberty, like what is going on here? You couldn't go someone else. I mean, I know he's all about the Jesus and everything, but still, I'm just not quite sure that gives me much confidence either. And I guess lastly for him, the sack thing is you mentioned, where he's just got off. He wasn't that bad though the year before, so maybe it's a fluky sort of thing. But this whole thing of he'll need to speed up at the next level, and that's not the place to do it. The place to do is Liberty. The place to look like you're playing fast was at Liberty, not look like you're going to play faster in the NFL. So altogether, again, he has physical traits. Maybe you could say the last shorter guy who had amazing physical traits to go in that sort of range was probably, I don't know, who are you talking about, Michael Vick or someone like that? But Michael Vick was insane athlete and performer on the field. I would not put Malik Willis in that bucket.
And Michael Vick also was from an athlete perspective, yes. I think we've kind of oversold Malik Willis's athleticism too. And Michael Vick, his freshman year, redshirt freshman year, Virginia Tech, 11.5 adjusted yards per attempt. How stupid? How stupid is that?
I mean, he had a cannon, and he was probably the best athlete, the fastest player in the NFL at quarterback.
Yeah. And so the sacks matter. I mentioned that Howell had a 24% sack rate on 3rd and long last year, 3rd and 6+. So obvious passing situations. Willis was 30%. And so I wanted to go into Willis, watching him to being totally open-minded. And he kind of looks like if you have an old Xbox controller and the joystick stops working, he has broken joystick syndrome where you're where are you going? What you doing, bud? Why are you running that way? Why are you running backwards? You're trying to backpedal, but you're kind of it was 2 consecutive plays where he had broken joystick syndrome. And I was what's exactly going on here? So I wanted to go in being receptive to it, but and again, the traits do matter. I'm totally on board with drafting for traits. I just want to make sure A, we're not overselling the traits, and B, we're not pushing traits into a realm where we're overlooking all the legitimate red flags.
Yeah. I feel like when people are watching the tape, they don't realize that all the players on Liberty and the schools they're playing against are all 25 pounds and 2 inches shorter than they would be if they're playing in the SEC or something like that. So it's he looks like a man amongst boys because he's playing with a bunch of boys out there, literal, not men they have in these other schools.
And that shows up too when you look at his numbers versus top 50 defenses. Going by SP Plus, Bill Connolly's number, he was really bad. He was good against UAB. UAB had a good defense, and his numbers in that game were very good. He played and he looked good in that game too. But the other games from Malik Willis was the top 50 defenses. Ole Miss, people talk about that game a lot. They bring up that game as being what happened there? But it wasn't just
that was slaughterhouse.
It was
right
bad.
There. Yeah.
The Army tape, fine. He had 46 attempts, 305 yards, a touchdown and a pick. That's not super efficient. Versus Louisiana, also a top 50 defense, not LSU, Louisiana, 34 attempts, 162 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. So it wasn't just the Ole Miss game either. Again, very good against UAB. That matters. Ole Miss, aggressively bad. Louisiana, bad. Army, not great. I know we can blame Liberty, but Liberty wasn't some scrub team. They've got some guys there. So I don't know. I worry a lot about those things.
Let's talk about this competition thing for a second, because there is who you played against as competition and who you have on your team as competition. Yes. For certain positions, I am willing to give more credit to the player based upon having poor teammates in a way.
Yeah.
Running backs, certain, especially guys who are going to go later in the round. If they're on a shitty team or small school sort of thing, I think you could say, oh, well, they're a man amongst boys, and that's why they're able to do so well. But the reality is you're not breaking 7 tackles on every play and running all the way in there. And the fact that your blockers are so bad and you're so dependent upon your blockers as a runner, that those guys can end up being undervalued. I'm not quite sure about quarterbacks Maybe there's something there. But I'm not quite sure there. Where, he also has poor competition. He's not playing with anyone. What do you think about that whole dynamic?
It's really hard because in the
Because that
NFL,
was like a Josh Allen thing too, by the way.
yeah,
Was that like everyone left, and that's why because Josh Allen's another guy. Maybe he doesn't have the one differential that you talked about. He's another guy where as a red shirt,
he was actually in that group. Yeah.
oh, he was. Oh, he redshirt. Was he redshirt?
He was the
He
only
played all the
one
way
who
through, though,
actually
right?
like,
I think he was a redshirt sophomore, and he was really good.
yeah.
And then he sucked. His final season as a redshirt junior.
So he went from 8.3 AYA in 2016 to 6.7. He was the one guy on the list who was like an actual superstar. Winston was the
Right.
other like competent guy. So he was on that list.
Right.
and
But
he's
again,
the
like a
big
lot of
exception.
excuses were made for the
Yeah.
fact that he was throwing to nobodies. I wasn't having it at the time, but
Maybe in
this whole Josh
retrospect we
Allen
should have.
thing,
Yeah.
why do you learn how to pass 3 years in your NFL career?
I
Like,
don't
save
want
us
to make
some time and do that
adjustments.
earlier.
I don't want to totally overhaul my process based on one outlier. Like I'm okay
Yeah.
making alterations, speaking with more nuance as a result of
Yeah.
it, making some
Yeah.
minor tweaks. I'm not going to overhaul everything and just ignore, everyone who's bad in college can be good in the NFL. Like that's
Anyway,
not.
sorry. So I cut
Yeah.
you off there. I cut you out there with the Josh Allen thing. But maybe Josh Allen, they could have said that. Maybe Herbert, you could have said that I don't know. Did he lose guys? I don't know what he did his final season. But go ahead.
He gained his brother. I remember that.
Yeah.
That was part of why
Yeah,
he
there you
came
go.
back. It was like he wanted to play with his
Yeah.
brother at Oregon. So like I guess he
Yeah.
gained that. I think that's the toughest thing because when it comes to like evaluating quarterbacks in the NFL, I feel like because I have a knowledge of NFL players, I can properly evaluate, hey, this guy's situation sucked. I'm not going to hold that against him. In college, that's a lot tougher. And I think that like if I were to point to an area where I think that my model may overestimate players, it's when they play with a really good competition. Now, does that mean that it underestimates guys with a bad supporting cast? I'm not really sure because again, like if I just look at the model, like let's look at successful first round picks since 2010, their average pre-draft rank in the model is 83rd percentile. The less successful one, we're in the 62nd percentile on average. So there's a big split there. So to me, I feel like I can feel pretty confident in valuing college stats without making too many tweaks. I will speak with more nuance when it comes to guys who may be in worse situations because of the Josh Allen thing, but I don't want to totally disregard guys who have worse stats just because their surrounding talent may not have been perfect.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think even more about Willis. I mean, the other things that we hear about him is that, he can kind of like do these things you can't teach. He's a good long ball thrower. But I mean, the reality is you just don't throw it long that often in the NFL. I mean, it's nice to have it,
Yeah.
in your back pocket, but it's not like what you can base your whole game around. The guy seems very charming, though.
Oh, yeah.
Whenever I've heard him talk, maybe he's charming the pants off of these dudes in these meetings also. All right. So we have your rankings. I think you kind of told us how you would rearrange them as Howell on there. How much is the draft going to change your scores / process here?
A lot because again, I'm not as good at this as the NFL is. I have to do like golf stuff. I have to do like baseball stuff. They don't have to do like talk about the Martinsville race, the Martinsville NASCAR race. Like this is their job. They're better at that than I am. So like I'd be an idiot if I didn't listen to what they say. So like I think it's most important for a couple of guys though. For Pickett, I don't think it's going to influence things very much. Like we know what he is. He goes 6th overall.
So even if the Panthers
Yes.
lose their minds and take
Yes.
him at 6, you're still not going to be that high on him.
Correct. Because, also because their situation is bad. Talk about supporting cast. If they take him at 6, they're not taking a left tackle at 6, which means their situation is still going to suck. So the odds he makes me look stupid.
Darnold.
Yeah,
Sam
exactly.
Darnold. Let me tell you about Sam Darnold.
Right,
here.
exactly.
Okay,
so Pickett, probably not as much. Willis, it will influence things for sure because I was talking about the Lions at 2nd overall. If he goes 2nd overall, like I'm not going to lose my mind and be like, oh my gosh, he's the next, he actually is the next Josh Allen. I'm not going to do that, but I'll be like, okay, the odds that he hits become higher at that point because the NFL had more confidence in him. With Sam Howell, right now, I'm okay being very skeptical of him. If he somehow surprises us and is I would say even top 20 pick. If he goes to the Steelers at 20, I will up my opinion of him in a pretty serious way because I don't think the NFL is going to value him that much. But if they do, that's a pretty important indicator. So I think that for him, it's going to matter a lot. Corral, it matters because I don't know what the NFL is going to do with him. So it depends on the player quite a bit. If Howell goes earlier than I expect him to go, I will be pretty excited by that. If Willis goes earlier than he's expected to go, that's interesting. If he goes later than he's expected to go, that also matters a lot. So it's a case by case basis, but I do think that I'd be an idiot not to consider what the NFL is telling me, because over the long run, they are better at this than I am.
Okay. Do you have an opinion on how many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round? I think the number is around 3-ish.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, there's some 2.5s over unders on there where it's going to be minus to the overside, and then vice versa. There are 3.5s out there where it's going to be minus to the low side. So about 3 is what people are saying. Do you think that's about right, or do you think there might be 2?
Yeah.
You don't sound too high on these guys. I guess you might not go 4, but what do you think about that?
I think that, like, if we're talking about like distributions of numbers, I would say the most likely number would be 3. Just because there is that incentive to get quarterbacks in the 5th-year option. We could see a lot of guys go towards the back out of the first round. There are a lot of teams that in theory could use a longer term solution at quarterback drafting towards the back end of the first round, or could move it back into the back end of the first round. So I would say the most likely number is 3. I think that like the lock is Willis. I would say the lock-ish is Pickett. I don't think he's a total lock to go first round. I'm not
I don't know
totally
what to
sold.
think about him, honestly. Yeah. I still can't believe that teams are that high on him, but who knows?
We've missed on evaluating where the NFL will draft people before. I would not be shocked with someone of his. Also, the buzz has kind of died down a bit, I think, on him too. So that's worth mentioning as well. I think the baseline number is 3, but I can't tell you which 3, and I can't tell you definitively if it will be 3. But I think that I would say 3 is the most likely number. And I feel pretty firm in that probably being where it settles out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Lions, the Panthers, they got to get somebody, but maybe they don't want to use their top picks on them. So the Lions are already positioned.
Well, the Panthers gave their 2nd-round pick to the Jets for Sam Darnold, so like they don't even have a 2nd-round pick.
They're fucked. They don't have a 3rd-round pick either.
No,
or a 4th-round pick. Oh man, they're in trouble. That's why I think they're going to take someone early, because I don't know, man. What are they going to do? Were they going to wait around?
You trade down 6 times, like you.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah. Maybe they could trade down.
I don't think they will. I think they should. I don't think they will, but I think they should.
Yeah, that's a good one. All right, well, Matt Rule, I'm sure he's number 1 on first coach to be fired odds here this offseason. So we can talk about that maybe when the season rolls around again. Jim, thank you so much for joining me again. You have like so many different things going on. You mentioned the multi-sports. It's too much to keep track of. So why don't you tell me what you want to plug right now?
So doing plenty of NFL draft stuff over at numberFire, but then also doing NASCAR, Formula One, golf, baseball is back now as well. So kind of all over the place, but mostly focused on betting and daily fantasy. So just kind of, wherever the winds may take me. This is a fun time of year with everything kind of going all at once. It's not NFL season, so I actually have time to do that stuff. So kind of all over the place. There's not really much to plug. It's just kind of everything.
Yeah, if anyone considers it a sport, Jim is your guy to follow on this. So follow him on Twitter. I'll plug your Twitter. Very good Twitter account here at Jim Sannes. That's SANNES. Follow him there. Get everything else here. I appreciate you again coming on here and us having able to have this discussion and convincing you that Matt Corral is indeed QB1 by the end of this. I'll be everyone else listening. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be coming at you again next week. Start to dig into some of the other positions as we get into draft season. It's all draft all the time now for the rest of April. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening, and I'll be talking at you then.